Groups are handy for organizing your objects, but what if you want to use the same groups on different pages? We have another type of group called a component that makes reuse easy. To begin, I have my page with a few navigation objects laid out and ungrouped. As before, I'll right-click on my selected objects and this time group as component. This object has a few different properties than the group. The content section refers to the total area displayed in the component. Think of the component as a small page being displayed on the main TGML. Content width and content height are the sizes of that subpage, while height and width refer to the scaled size on this page. If I resize the component, the size changes, but the content sizes do not. We have another property called clip. Again, if my component is a small page, clipping will cut off any objects that fall outside the component boundaries. Also notice that a component has position properties available, whereas groups do not. This means that functions requiring access to these values, like bindings, exposes, animations, and scripts, can move the component as a whole. One last thing to note in the object tree is how bindings are named. I'll give my component a name to keep track of it. Then bind the text content the same way we did before. Down in the test pane, the binding name is listed as component name dot bind name. This doesn't affect our preview at all, but will be critical in the next video section when we start binding real data. Now for the real reason you're here, the component library. Each of these categories is a group of pre-built components that we can use on the screen. We'll come back to these later. For now, I'm going to use My Components, though I could also right-click and create a new category. To add a component to the library, I'll drag it from the object tree, not the page, and drop it in the category. I can give it a name that will show up in the library as well as a description. While I could go ahead and drag the component out and use it now, let me show you some more interesting features. I'll right-click my component and edit. A new window opens up, and now you see what I meant when I said a component is like a small page. Aside from the metadata fields that describe it in the library, a component has very similar properties to a TGML page. All of my usual editing tools are available here, including the Preview tab. Most importantly, I want to expose the properties that are going to change from object to object. For this component, these are the text content and the rectangle fill. I should also change these names to something logical. I'll save. And close the editor. We'll come back to this update window shortly. Now I can control drag this component out and drop it on the page, and it will create a new component exactly like the existing one. But this isn't that useful. Instead, I'll delete my old buttons and drag out new components over them. In the tree, I have some new objects. At the top, I have a definition. This defines all the objects and properties of my original component. Below that, each button is implemented as a use object. Here we have the standard component properties we saw earlier, as well as the properties we exposed. The expose properties apply to each component instance. All the others are inherited from the definition. Let's see how I can use this to quickly update a whole project. Maybe I've decided that I don't like the button appearance. I want light text on a dark background. I don't have to change each object individually. I'll edit my component directly in the library. Now when I save, the reference definition updater scans for this component on each page and updates all of my files automatically. When I return to the page, the changes are already made. I can also add new objects and exposes on existing components. Sometimes it makes more sense to add components as placeholders and update them later. Components are a critical part of building graphics. In fact, most of your development will involve adding and editing components rather than basic graphics, as we'll see later. In the meantime, let's move on to layers, our last type of component group. Until then, thank you.